You have to take risk in order to build a big business. It's impossible to do it without taking some risk. It's about which bets am I going to take and which bets am I going to double down on, even if it might not work.
David, it's great to have you here. Thank you very much for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
What I'd love to do is just to start right back at the beginning, before you became a leading coffee brand, and to talk me through how the journey really started, especially the spark of inspiration.
Yeah, sure. So we started in 2011, so 14 years ago now, when I turned my dad's old mobile phone store on Old Street Roundabout into a coffee shop. And it was definitely not the aim to build a kind of national coffee challenger brand or anything like that. It was basically I inherited his mobile phone business. He unfortunately passed away a year before. So I had to do something with that business and the long lease that my family had on that building. And it had become clear that Old Street and Shoreditch was changing massively. And it felt like a coffee shop slash cocktail bar would be an amazing use for that business. So it wasn't necessarily a spark of inspiration. It was kind of fueled by necessity to do something with this building and this business. But also I think the desire to have a go at building something kind of small and real. At the time I had a tech startup, so it was completely different, and I definitely had the urge to kind of do something real. So I think it kind of those two things came together nicely at the same time.
And was there a particular inspiration behind it being coffee? The moment you were forced to make a decision about what to start, did you think, oh, coffee for any particular reason?
Yeah, do you know what? My dad and I had actually discussed that would be a great place for some kind of coffee shop or wine bar or meeting place because old East London was changing so much. So in 2011, the Olympics are coming the next year. Shoreditch is everyone is obsessed with Shoreditch. It feels like London has really like gravitated east, and suddenly Old Street Roundabout is no longer this like bit of wasteland vaguely near the city. It's Old Street Roundabout where everyone gets off the tube to then walk down to Shoreditch. So it just felt crazy that you had this like B2B business operating out of such a cool little perfect. I mean, for people who haven't seen it, it's a perfectly circular, small standalone building that is now kind of surrounded by skyscrapers. I think since we've been there, every corner of the roundabout, if roundabouts have corners, every side of the roundabout has been kind of demolished and a huge new skyscraper has come up in its place. But we're kind of still there in this little circular building. So it clearly needed to be some kind of meeting place. And this is about the time when, people are starting to understand what a flat white is and starting to kind of look to specialty coffee beyond the kind of existing chains doing the American version of coffee and looking more at specialty coffee. So it felt like the right thing to do with the building.
And were you around 25 at the time? Or?
Yeah, I think I was 24, 25. Yeah, something like that. Yeah.
Wow. And how do you think that affected your confidence going into starting a business?
I think it probably made me more confident. I think there's something great about being 25 and thinking everything's easy and being quite naive and not asking too many questions and not consulting with too many people. I think if I'd gone and sat with loads of experts and asked their opinion, they would have told me all the reasons why it couldn't work. And to be honest, that they probably were right. Like it was not necessarily a sensible decision to do that, right? Like it was all of my money in the world. It was something I had no experience in. It was a huge gamble. Obviously it paid off, and I was fortunate enough that I was able to make that gamble and that it did pay off. But I think I look back and think if I'd gone and spoken with 20 experts in the field, they probably would have told me not to do it.
Hmm. And so, were there any moments in the early days where you did get a piece of advice that you thought that's really helped me throughout the journey after that, that you sort of look back upon and think that was great advice at the time?
Do you know what? I think as a leader of a business of any scale, you have to get good at like listening to everything and then choosing what you're going to soak up and what you're going to ignore, and when you're going to just say, actually, I understand that this person is saying that thing, but I just think they're wrong, and I'm going to do it anyway, or not. And so, look, I think I can't say that there was this one magic moment, but you definitely every conversation you have with someone who's in the industry or in another industry has done it before and it's worked, has done it before and it's failed. You get these kind of watch outs that are like, you should really watch out for this, or you should be really careful about this. I think the thing that I realize with hindsight is that people are much kinder to you when you're small.
Hmm.
You know, people want to help you out. So landlords want to really help you out because you're this small kind of naive startup. And when you accidentally breach the planning rules, as we did a couple of times, you know, the council don't come down like a ton of bricks. They say, oh, look, we understand this is your first time, but you really need to do this form and this piece of paper. You know, roll forward now, and it's definitely not the same because you're kind of expected to know better. So look, I think you just have to get used to kind of rolling with the punches and try and, yeah, just try and soak up whatever you can from people around you and from your own team, right? Like I think I learned way more from my own team than I did from anyone external.
I think I heard a story, might not be true, of you had a barman slash dishwasher who is now chief of staff that at the time
Yeah,
helped you
that's
choose
right.
that pink.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
that's absolutely right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah. Yeah, he's called Ted. He's now our chief of staff. He started being a barman. I think he just liked hanging out there and therefore got a job. And then at some point he kind of pitched me, you know, I think instead of being on the bar 5 days a week, I should do that 3 days and do the social media 2 days a week. And yeah, it's kind of spiraled from there. And I mean, you know, it was he and I who really built the first version of the direct to consumer business. So yeah, you know, you do learn and particularly, I wasn't working in the store full time. Like I've kind of never done a shift in one of the grinds. I mean, I've toyed with it a little bit in the early days, but from day one, we had a store manager and a whole team, and they're the guys that learn what people like and what people don't, and they soak it up every day. So you have to listen to the team, and that still applies now as we're a much bigger business doing lots of different things.
So fair to say that mentors don't just come from in a sort of hierarchical way. Mentors can come from all angles.
Yeah, definitely. Look, I think you know you know a couple of years in, as I decided I was going to stop doing the tech-based thing, focus on this full time. I started to raise money, and then these other people come into your life that you know come onto the board or invest, and they certainly become mentors of some kind because they've seen it and done it. And I realize now, you know, someone who's kind of I don't know 20 years in now, maybe not 20 years in, 15 years into grind, maybe a few more years than that in terms of business stuff. You just learn through doing these things. It's not particularly magic, it's just experience. Like if you've done a load of funding round, if you've dealt with lawyers loads, if you've dealt with team issues loads, personnel issues, they are kind of businesses are to some extent all the same. Like if you boil them down to a really fundamental level. So it's just experience, right? So if you can surround yourself by the right people with the right kinds of experience, that's super helpful.
And how would you say is the best way to go about reaching those people? Because I saw, for example, I think Richard Koch and John Ayton, both fantastic
Yeah.
people to have on board. What's the best way to reach people like that when you're starting out?
Yeah, so they've all one has led to the other in all of these people. So you know, I won't go into it will become I'll confuse myself if I'm not careful. But you know, Richard ended up investing because of Tim, who's another amazing guy who's on my board from who's formerly a partner at Balderson Capital. And I knew Tim because he invested in our last business. That was completely unrelated to this, you know, probably 20 years ago now. And, you know, all things come full circle. And even in that business didn't, you know, it's still going that business, but it's changed dramatically. And that business ultimately didn't work out for the VC that invested, but they ended up being an amazing contact who've introduced me to lots of other people, which is why like it's so important to just always play the long game on all things and just not be short termist because it's not a huge world if you're in somewhere like London. You know, the number of people that are growing businesses and funding businesses, everyone knows everyone, and your reputation does become really important. So you know, I always think that it's you know just super important to you know be honest, be upfront, be transparent, do what you say you're going to do, and you know it's certainly you know the hardest raise by far is the first million and the first people, and then if you choose the right people, they bring you other people and other doors open up. If of course you're also doing a semi decent job of building the business.
Am I right in thinking Richard Koch did the 80/20
That's
principle?
right. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
Do you take that on board in your business now?
Yeah, I mean, I think everyone can take the 80/20 principle on board in every you know in every aspect of life. But yeah, no, absolutely. Richard's an amazing guy. He founded LEK Capital. He was the K LEK Consulting. He was the K in that. He's gone on to be a kind of a prolific individual venture capitalist almost. He's an amazing guy, and he's super supportive.
And you've obviously got experience across such a wide variety of channels now. I know you're an advocate for omni-channel approach. When you move into a new channel like direct to consumer or to retail, are you seeking out consultants before you go into those areas, or are you taking the risk and using your knowledge and learning as you go?
I wouldn't say we're not necessarily, we're bringing in expertise. Doesn't normally take the form of consultants. If we decide, we made a decision, so the background, we started rolling out our high street stores. We got up to a dozen or so and a few hundred people just before the pandemic. We then launched our compostable Nespresso capsules online just before the pandemic. They took off in an unbelievable way, and that became the biggest part of the business, the direct to consumer business. So as we emerged from the pandemic, we were kind of 50-50 high street and online. So it's a huge shift, and that was kind of a change that, like, we absolutely made it happen, but then it also happened to us. We made the strategic decision to launch online, develop these new products. We invested in it quite heavily, but we didn't expect to have the shift in the business we did. Going into grocery was much more kind of planned and our doing. And so we actually had the time to say, okay, we're going to acquire this business to help, and we're going to bring this person in, and we're going to bring that person in. And, because you can't, if you want to take your brand into grocery, that's a whole new sport again. So you need people that know that, and you'll absolutely fail if you think you can just figure it out as you go along. So I think it's about knowing when to kind of be instinctive and do your own thing, and when to say, actually, this is a piece of the world where you do require kind of industry expertise, and then bring that in. So we've not always got it right, and and sometimes we've invested too much ahead of the curve, and sometimes we've been, more often than that, we've been too late, and we've been kind of scrambling to then bring in people. But that's all part of the fun.
And from the outside looking in, it just seems like this business has blown up, fantastic brand that's known by so many people.
Oh, thank you.
Has there been any moments along the way where you thought, you mentioned the pandemic, have there been moments where you thought, we're in trouble here, this is a really tough time?
Oh yeah, I mean, most weeks,
Yeah.
every day.
The stuff people doesn't see.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, look, I think with everything, people see the glossy external version, right? Like you see, like, people's personal Instagram profiles. It's the highlights. It's not a reality. It's not a realistic reflection of the journey. Look, loads of stuff has gone right, but we've got tons wrong along the way. We've got store locations wrong, that we ended up closing a store in the pandemic, and we've got our numbers wrong a million times, and we've been behind budget where we thought this was going to happen, and we haven't won that thing that we thought was going to happen, or we've got supply issues, or we've printed the wrong thing on the back of 20,000 bits of packaging, or the lorry picked up all of the stuff to go to one of the grocers and something happened, or it is endless. Like, it's honestly endless. Like, that's the reality. If you have a business, we're now serving, you know, tens and tens and tens of millions of coffees a year in one way or another, through our cafes, through our online store, through our partners like Soho House, British Airways, through the grocers. There are so many moving parts that stuff goes wrong on a daily basis, and that's just the reality of running a business, I think, at any scale. And I think as you grow, stuff probably goes wrong more. Certainly when you are in the growing phase. Like, if we stopped everything now, added nothing new, it would all settle down, and things would hopefully go wrong a little bit less. But that's part of trying to be a challenger brand. You haven't got time to stop and make sure you fix everything before you carry on, because it's all about trying to grab market share and challenge the big brands now, not over the next 20 years. So you have to just keep going.
I started a food business actually through Virgin Startup. So
You do? Amazing.
it's reassuring to hear that, you're not the only one experiencing those challenges. Do you find other peers that are in similar situations to you, or communities or loved ones? Like, how do they help you navigate those challenges as you're going through them?
Yeah, look, I think in reality, your friends and your family can help in terms of just like general emotional support, but they can't really help in terms of understanding the journey, to be honest, because, like, why would they? Like, they've not done it, and they don't really understand what it's like. I'm in a group of CEOs that get together regularly once a month it's a thing called YPO. It's a kind of international organization. That's incredibly helpful. It's just like group therapy, basically. And you realize, some of the guys in there are running incredible businesses that are many multiples of the size of mine. And they've also kind of got their head in their hands about this thing that happened today or didn't happen yesterday. And you realize that we're all going through these same challenges. We all find ourselves kind of in charge of quite large groups of people and quite large decision making processes, and it's really hard. So and it's good to be friends with other people in the industry as well. I'm friends with Alex, who's founded Dash, who I know came through the program, so it feels like a good one to mention. He and I call each other and compare notes on things, and I've got quite a few relationships like that. And sometimes it's just good to hear that other people are also, when you say, "Oh, this has happened," and they just laugh and say, "Yeah, this happened to me 2 weeks ago." That's a huge kind of relief sometimes, just to hear that it's not just you.
One of the things that I've noticed is you've given back to the community through Virgin Startup by doing mentoring yourself. And that's something that I've done. I started a business through Virgin Startup, now do mentoring as well. What's the motivation behind giving back through mentoring?
Look, I think I'm super conscious that I've had big doses of good luck along the way. I was lucky to, even though it was in terrible circumstances, I was lucky to kind of inherit this building and have the opportunity to do it. I was lucky to have a safety net of kind of, my mum in her house, where I could retreat to if it all went wrong and I couldn't pay the rent. And I was lucky to have, I originally got involved in the other tech business because my best friend from school, his dad had invested in it. And, not everyone's best friend from school has got a dad who is investing in startups and can therefore introduce you to people. So I'm very conscious that I've had lots of luck along the way. So, if I can try and help other people here and there, then I think it would be foolish not to do that. I think it would be a shame not to do that.
And any lessons having had mentors in your life and having been a mentee yourself? Are there any lessons that you have for mentors or mentees in terms of being effective?
I mean, the first thing I always say is that I'm probably going to be right about 60 or 70% of the things that I tell you and wrong about the other 30, 40%. So like, please do not think that just because this is my view, it's right. And certainly if I look at the guys that I've been involved with who have been mentoring me, they've not always been right. Like by their own admission, they are not always right. I think it's really dangerous to overly rely on someone else's opinions. And I think, certainly I know that some of the VC firms I speak to, they're looking for founders and chief executives who don't necessarily listen to everything they're told to do, because at some point you have to break the mold or do something which seems unlikely or improbable if you want to build a really, really valuable business. You kind of have to, because if you just do everything that everyone tells you to do, you're unlikely to be taking the right risks. People have a strange relationship with the word risk. You have to take risk in order to build a big business. It's impossible to do it without taking some risk. It's about which bets am I going to take and which bets am I going to double down on, even if it might not work. So I think it's dangerous to I'm not sure I'm exactly answering your question here, but I think it is dangerous to fully rely anything on a mentor. But you need to just try and, I think, as I said at the start, soak it up, listen to all of their points of views, and then go away and reflect and say, actually, yeah, I think he was absolutely right about that. I think it's a really good flag about I should have the lawyer check this thing. And I think, yeah, maybe I am focusing here and I should be focusing here. But on that point, he just doesn't understand the industry and he just doesn't get it and he's wrong. And I think you've got to have the conviction to do that, because otherwise, if you go and have 5 conversations with 5 mentors, they're not all going to have perfect overlap in terms of their advice. And look, to anyone, doing it, I would say, just don't overpromise would be the main thing. I think it's really easy on these calls to promise I'm going to do an hour with you every week and I'm going to really help and I'm going to do this. I think that's quite unhelpful for the person on the other side. So I think just be really clear about what's the time commitment, and then what's this relationship going to be like. Am I going to invest, or are you going to put me on the board, or where is this going? Because I think people don't want to just have nice conversations an hour a month forever, because people have got other stuff to do. So I think my advice as a mentee would be, have a few calls, fine, but at some point find a way to make that person part of the journey so that they're actually bought in and invested in some way, because otherwise their goodwill is likely to run out at some point. And that sounds a bit commercial, but I think that's just the reality of the kind of people that are doing mentoring probably have more opportunities to do that than they have time to do that. So get them to focus on your thing, not the other guy trying to get them, or girl trying to get them to focus on that thing.
That makes a lot of sense. And when it comes to board meetings, what's your approach to making sure you get the most out of advice from the people at the table, whilst also still being in control of the decisions yourself?
Yeah. Um, that's not, they're not easy, right? And I think at every level, um, board meetings can be hard for a number of reasons, because you're trying to condense a huge amount of information and a huge number of things going on into a nice, neat pack. Ideally, that everyone can read 3 days before the meeting, and then you can just not discuss it and have questions and answers on, okay, this thing, it says here on this pack that this thing is, on this page that this is not happening or this is happening. We should talk about that. Fine. Pick out a few key things. And then I think the point of the board is to make the decisions that I feel that I need help with making. I think it's I don't I try not to turn it into like an insurance policy. Like, if I've made this decision, I've made the decision. I'm not going to then make sure we have a pointless 15-minute conversation about it just to make sure that everyone else is bought in and has signed off. So if it goes wrong, it's not my fault. And I think board meetings can become that if you're not careful. I want to talk about the things where I'm genuinely not sure. The things that I'm sure about, I've already decided and done 3 weeks ago, right? So there's no point now having a debate to try and get an insurance policy that everyone else agreed. It should be about, okay, well, I really think we should do a site in Manchester, which we are doing, by the way, and opening this summer. But I think this is at the level of investment. It's a multi-million-pound investment. It's a big decision. This should be a board debate, and I think it's about picking out those two or three key things to have a real debate about, rather than kind of reading through a ball pack and agreeing stuff that already got action 3 weeks ago.
Otherwise, it can feel, I guess, a bit like just presenting for the sake of presenting as opposed to outcomes.
Telling people a load of stuff they don't really need to know for no particular reason. It's like just like ticking a box of, we've done a board meeting. And I think I've had those board meetings in the past, and that was my fault, not the fault of anyone on the board, for clarity. And I think, but you learn over the years that no, we should be having a strategic debate about, are we going to do this thing? Are we going to launch in this channel? How much are we prepared to gamble and invest to achieve this thing over here? That's when you get actual value. And plenty of times I've gone in with one view and come out with another view, and we've actually done the opposite of what I thought we were going to do. Because when you get the opinion of a load of other smart people, you realize, actually, okay, yeah, maybe I was wrong on that.
And just thinking now to you back then at 24, is there anything you would say to yourself with hindsight now that would make the journey better going forward?
Yeah, this is a classic one, and I find it hard not to say the same thing every time, which is, it's all going to be okay. Um, because that's kind of just what you want to hear when you're in that point. I think that's one of those questions where the cliched answers are the really good ones. Like, it's all going to be okay. Enjoy the journey, because this is the most fun bit. And actually, I look back now, and like, I love my job now, but it's bigger. It's more pressure. The swings are bigger. The hits are bigger, and the misses are bigger. It's a bigger organization. It's much more complex. There was, without a doubt, I realize more now than I did then, there was an amazing period of kind of the early days where it was, tens of people, not hundreds of people, and a couple of stores. And it was so much fun. And there were definitely moments that I missed that because I was stressing about the planning for the next site, or the fundraise for the next site, or the next funding route, or whatever it was. I was looking too much to the future and not enjoying the moment. But then again, well, if I hadn't had that kind of mindset, then the business probably wouldn't be where it is today. So it's hard to kind of decouple those things of your innate desire to like look forward and constantly be bored of the status quo, which is basically what it comes down to, and enjoying the moment. Those two things are kind of at odds with one another, but it is what it is. You have to try and enjoy it as best you can.
Is there any tips for finding ways to mark those moments or to make those moments more celebrated?
I'm laughing because we constantly tell ourselves that we are terrible at doing that. We are terrible. We'll do a fundraise for millions of pounds and won't even open a bottle of champagne, or we'll open a new store and it'll be so intense that we'll forget to even have a team lunch and you know cheers over some cocktails or something. So I should not be giving advice on that because I need to hear advice on that about how to do that more. I think it's hard because you're by the time that store opens or that thing launches in that grocer, or you launch on British Airways, these huge like milestone moments, the reality is they all take quite a long time to get there. So you've been working on that thing for 6 months and you knew it was definitely happening for the last 50% of that. So by the time it happens, it's slightly kind of anticlimactic because you kind of knew that it had happened 2 or 3 months ago, but you weren't ready to celebrate it then because you don't want to jinx it because it could still not happen. So by the time it actually happens, it's more just relief than anything else. It's like, okay, amazing, that thing actually happened. We actually did that thing, but you're already kind of mentally ready to move on to the next thing.
I think that's what I found was there wasn't often champagne moments. There was processes and then relief at the end, which is interesting.
I mean, I love the interview with, I think it's the founder of Canva or one of those businesses that exited for, obscene billions. It's like, what did you do when the money hit? I slept for 2 days. Like literally went to bed and just slept for 2 days. And it was like, the person described it as like 20 years of stress, just like finally leaving their body for 2 days. I think honestly, that's all you want to do at that point is just, okay, just breathe and chill. You don't want to like, I don't know, go to a nightclub and spray bottles of champagne around like you might imagine, or like people might do in a film. That's just not how I've ever felt when we've hit those big milestone moments. I've just felt relief.
So that's interesting. That friction between enjoying the journey and always looking forward.
Yeah.
So is it maybe more about embracing the journey and living with it in the moment as it goes?
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, just I try and just check myself all the time that like some days when I leave the house and I'm like, oh, this thing is going wrong. I'm worried about this. It's like, okay, look, you're leaving your house, you're going to the company that you built, you're leaving your lovely house to go to the company that you really like. All of these problems you created yourself. You're literally the only person that is responsible for all of these things existing. So you can't now be negative. Like, this is great. If you'd thought that you were here, you'd be here 10 years ago. You would have thought that sounds amazing. So cheer up. It's going to be fine. And like, you give yourself a little pep talk, right? Like I think you have to do that, and you have to just kind of correct because it's easy to be dragged down with the weight of the slack, which goes every 10 minutes, 24 hours a day with something happening and someone needing something like the email and the phone calls. Like, it can kind of drag you down a little bit if you're not careful, just under the sheer kind of weight and responsibility of it. So yeah, I have to just like check myself and remind myself this is a good journey. This has been an amazing journey. It's all good. Keep going. It's going to be fine, as I said before.
Nice. And in terms of practical elements and tips for founders, if people are starting out on their journey, are there any practical tips that you think would be particularly useful for them to hear?
Look, I mean, so many different kind of journeys, right? But I think the generic advice would be that you always want to try and get to realizing if this thing is going to work or not work as quickly as possible and with as little money as possible. Now, the kind of the minimum viable product, right? Like, and have I got product market fit? That depends. That's massively different depending on what you're doing. If you're starting a new car company, you need several tens of billions to get to that point, right? If you're starting an online fashion store, you might be able to do it with 500 quid, a Shopify account and a phone and some pre-order off someone else that's actually going to manufacture it once you've done it. So there's a huge spread on what that looks like. But you don't plan forever, I think, would probably be my other kind of generic piece of advice. Like, I see people quite a lot, and maybe it's self-selecting, right? Because the people that are getting in touch are to ask for advice are the people who have stopped to ask for advice, and therefore perhaps are prone to kind of over planning. And the people who are just doing it, well, I never knew that because they didn't get in touch and I've never met them before. So there might be an element of self-selection, but there are definitely people who have been working on their deck and working on their idea for 5 years, and it's just too long. Like, you just got to get on with it, start walking, and see if you fall over or if you can graduate into a jog and then a run and then a sprint eventually. Yeah, just kind of get on with it in the right way, but in a measured way where you're risking as little as possible. And I always advise overlap with the last thing and the new thing if that's in any way possible, right? Rather than I'm quitting today my existing job and I'm going all in on my startup that has a high chance of failure. It's like, surely can we not get a few proof points that this thing is going to work before you quit your job? Because that just feels like an unnecessary level of stress to be placing on yourself and the idea at such an early stage. And I think people convince themselves, no, I've got to go all in. I disagree. I don't think you do. I think you can do a lot of the early stuff. I was still doing my old business for 2 years alongside grind. And I didn't go, 18 months to 2 years, something like that. So I didn't go full time until we had one store doing a couple of million of revenue, a team of 20 people, and had raised the money to then roll out the next 2 or 3 stores. So when the external capital came in to do the next 2 or 3 stores, I was like, okay, fine. I'm now taking other people's money. I owe it to everyone to go full time, and that's the right moment to do that. But that was quite a way into the journey. So yeah, don't jump from the old thing too fast.
How do you think the first business helped the second?
Oh, massively. That was like, I was really lucky to be brought into a kind of tech-based startup as, from the outside, but kind of evolved into a junior co-founder role. There's kind of 2 junior co-founders, 2 senior co-founders who actually had started the business on day one. We went together and raised money and built the business, and it was like getting paid to do an MBA, basically, but doing it for real. Like, I knew nothing about scaling a business, growing teams, raising money, talking to customers. I didn't really know any of that. I'd picked up a lot from working in my dad's mobile phone shop as a teenager. Like, I learned a lot from him just about how the world works and how to talk to people and how to sell on a basic level. But then, I think that was the most amazing kind of prequel to Grind, was doing that, because it meant when I was in the room with landlords saying, you should give me this space, or we're going to do a good job, or investors helping me to fund it, or when I was poaching our first ops director from a much better job to come and work for this 2-site business, I knew vaguely how to do those things. And it's all about bringing the right people in and then, like, making key partners work, be that funders, be that property, whoever that might be in your line of business. It's about being able to interact with those people. And I learned all of those things in the previous business.
And I've heard you talk about the importance of the people that you bring around you. Do you think there are particularly important hires to bring on board early into a business?
Yeah, look, it's absolutely all about the people. And that becomes more and more the case the bigger the business gets, because obviously in the early days you're the head of everything, right? You're the director of everything, literally. And then piece by piece you finally got the money or the capacity to bring in someone to do that thing full time. So, okay, fine, I don't have to do payroll anymore, thank God. Okay, I don't have to do this thing now, thank God. I think everyone always brings finance people in too late, for sure. Like, we've got an incredible CFO now, a guy called Dan, who's been with us for nearly 10 years. But I wish he'd been there for the previous 4 as well, like from day one. Now, clearly, I could never have hired him. I could never have afforded him on day one. But I think I think for me, it was finance, because that's the thing that I really need someone owning day to day, and it's so critical. But I think if you're amazingly good at that, it might be a different thing. But I think having someone to lean on who is just great and reliable and is there and gets it is super important. So it's hard to be it's hard when it's just you.
And I remember hearing, I think, that your dad bought mobilephones.com, the domain, with a fax machine back in
Yes,
the
that's
90s.
right.
So
Yeah, that's
you've grown
right.
up with an entrepreneurial surrounding.
Yes.
How do you think that's influenced you?
Yeah, I think it influenced me massively. I kind of had the yin and the yang of my dad, who was very entrepreneurial, always worked for himself, started businesses. Some did really well, some didn't. And then my mum, who kind of worked corporate jobs to provide stability and pay the school fees and smooth out the peaks and the troughs. So I like to think that I've ended up in quite a good kind of middle ground between the two of them. But yeah, for sure, I think I used to look at him and the entrepreneurial stuff that he did, and I think I probably wouldn't be doing it if I wasn't. And my sister's ended up the same way as well. She's running her own business, a cocktail discovery app called Dusk. And I think that's something that was instilled in both of us from growing up for sure. And also the kind of people that we were surrounded with. I didn't grow up with friends whose parents were all lawyers and accountants. It was a bit more eclectic than that. And I think those things are a massive influence in your younger years for sure.
So when you went to university and studied economics, was the thinking behind that to always go into business, or were you thinking more on the sort of commercial side like your mum?
Um, I mean, I'd love to say there was a great deal of thought. There wasn't. I did three A levels, and it was the one I liked the most. So I wanted to carry on. I felt like it made sense on every level to go to university, like for the fun and for the education and for the CV. And that was the one I wanted to carry on. And I figured, look, I mean, my advice to everyone is, if you can get into a good university and you're doing a kind of any of those old school subjects, to me as an employer, are kind of equal on a CV. If someone's doing something really left field, you might look at the course, but beyond that, where is economics or English or history or maths or whatever, right? Like unless this is a highly specialized role where that really matters. The point is, they went to a great uni and graduated doing one of these traditional subjects. They're definitely smart. Tick. But then there's another five boxes to tick, right? That doesn't mean everything. That's just a box ticked, and they could stick at something for 3 years. So for me, it was about this was just the thing that I enjoyed. So yeah, I ended up at UCL doing economics.
And I know that now you've done some angel investing. What do you look for from the founders that you support?
Yeah, I it's it's really hard because you kind of want to find a balance between, okay, we're looking at it purely commercially, purely as, look, this is money. I haven't got endless amounts of it. I would like to get a return on it. It makes sense for me personally to invest in stuff which is a little bit further on because the vast majority of my personal net worth is still tied up in grind, which is, still in its early stages and still a high growth business. So, the classic advice from a financial advisor would be put everything in something really boring because you're already 90% into a startup, basically. I mean, maybe we've graduated a bit beyond a startup now, but it is fun to get involved with and help other people. And it's more interesting. And I think potentially you get a better return. So I personally am looking at stuff which is, got real traction, doing a few million in revenue and is going somewhere. And maybe I'm not getting in at the very lowest valuation point, but I'm kind of fine with that for the reduced risk. And then beyond that, on the human level, I think I'm personally like, obviously you're very influenced by your own journey. And the thing that I know for sure, I don't know much for sure. Like, I don't think any of us do. The thing that I know for sure is the CEO is the person who has to just find a way to keep the business funded, alive, growing, and just not let it die. So that's the number one quality. It's like, do I believe you are going to just figure it out one way or another? You are all in and you won't let this thing die and you'll find a way to adapt and pivot and grow or not. And I think it's kind of, if in early stage stuff, it's, of course the product matters, of course the brand matters, of course the numbers matter, but it's definitely I think in early stage businesses, it's much more of a, for me, and I might be completely wrong, but my view is it's much more of a kind of a CEO bet in the early stages than it is necessarily about the business. I think that changes dramatically as the business scales. It's much more about the team, about the product, etc. But in the early days, it is very focused, I think, on the CEO.
All right. Well, thank you so much, David, for all your advice. Really appreciate it. What's next for Grind?
We've got loads going on. We're opening in Manchester in the summer, as I mentioned, which is super exciting. Our first kind of flagship store outside of London, right in the heart of Manchester. And then, yeah, we're really focused on the new parts of the business. So grocery, we're in. We have our coffee beans, our pods, and our ready to drink coffee cans in all of the major grocers now. And we just, the most recent one is Sainsbury's, launched a few weeks ago. So we're now in basically all of the grocers, which is amazing and is a whole new world. And then we're also doing lots more in the kind of B2B space. So as I mentioned, we're working with British Airways, and we're now increasingly working with big offices as well. So we've launched a machine called Grind Pro, which is kind of a really high end vending machine for offices like you might see in a typical co-working space or large office. So we're really excited about that. It's all about bringing craft coffee to lots of different people in lots of different ways and just elevating it at every level, right? Like, it's not always going to be a flat white in Shoreditch Grind in the middle of London, right? Like, people are enjoying coffee in a can out of the fridge, on a plane, in an office, in loads of different ways. That's what's so amazing about coffee, and we want to increase the quality in all of these places, which keeps it fun.
What's cool as well, I've seen with the new coffee machine that you're doing, still got the cool elements of the grind branding, right?
Yeah,
It
yeah,
still
yeah,
has that
absolutely.
touch.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. We can't. That's it. Has to be right because it has to speak to the brand. And even if you're in an office in, wherever having a coffee, we want to channel as much of that flat white on a Friday morning in Shoreditch Grind energy as we can through the brand, through the video on the screen, through the cup, through the images in the magazine on the British Airways flight, whatever it might be, right? Because that's what we're trying to recreate. It's not possible for it to always be that, but we're trying to get as close to that as we can.
Awesome. Well, I'm sure the founders will massively appreciate your advice, and thank you for your time.
Thank you.